This is Closereads,
a philosophy podcast with Mark and Wes.
I'm Wes Alwan.
And I'm Mark Linsenmeyer. Why, it's another new reading. We were alerted to this short article, 5 pages, by Bruno Latour from, I see, 2007, called Can We Get Our Materialism Back, Please? So I have not read this, but it was cited for what purpose I don't quite actually remember in one of the books we're reading by Graham Harman for some upcoming Partially Examined Life episodes. He's evidently a great admirer of Bruno Latour, but dismisses in general Latour's view as, I think, maybe not materialist enough, that of trying to reduce everything to its effects on other things, so that if you want to say, what is this glass? You just talk about all the relations that the glass, what function does the glass serve? What is it? How does it act in relation to everything else?
And in particular, treating everything, I think, with Latour as a social construction. I think, isn't Latour the one famous for trying to argue a quark is a social construction? Maybe I'm making that up, but he later seemed to reverse course on that, and this may be the paper or one of the papers where he does that.
Right. What was the year of the very famous book of his that we actually read? I'm gonna look this up for the Partially Examined Life. We read back in 2019, We Have Never Been Modern, from 1993. So quite a bit before this. And yes, Harman seems to think that Latour has gotten more right-minded in a number of ways over the years. I know one of them was a rejection of Foucault style, just everything is just power relations and there's no objective morality buried in there. Again, this just goes with your characterization as a social construction guy. But I don't know too much about what this actually is. Do you want to get us started? Or do you have any other preliminary thoughts?
No.
Okay.
Shall I read the abstract?
Sure.
If it's good enough, we might just be able to stop with stuff right there. Technology is epistemology's poor relative. It still carries the baggage of a definition of matter handed down to it by another odd definition of scientific activity. Consequence is that many descriptions of things have nothing thingy about them. They're simply objects mistaken for things. Hence the necessity of a new descriptive style that circumvents the limits of the materialist, in effect idealist, definition of material existence. This is what has been achieved in the group of essays on thick things, for which this note serves as an afterword. All right, well, let's hope this afterword is summative.
Yes.
After some. You want to keep going?
Well, I'm just even wondering if most philosophy papers don't have abstracts, right? Scientific papers have abstracts, and I think they're not meant to tease things. Just an odd definition of scientific activity. I feel like a scientific abstract would actually tell you what that definition is, or it would have a little more actual content in it than we're seeing here.
Yeah, you and I have a lot of experience, essentially. Well, I was going to say writing abstracts, but they're a little bit more involved in abstracts. What is this journal, ISIS, that it's in? That's just a major philosophy journal, right?
I assume it's
Journal of the History of Science.
It's the ISIS newsletter.
Yeah, there you go. They're very interested in these subjects. So it's philosophy. Yeah, I don't know if the abstract is just this journal requires it. I don't know. It's weird. But or maybe it's a product of the digital repository from which this was downloaded. Possible. But yeah.
Yeah, I don't know
Um,
what the consequences that many descriptions of things have nothing thingly about them. Well, what would that possibly mean? That I mean, it seems like Harman wants the notion of object to be expanded beyond, you know, physical things. Uh,
well, if they have nothing thingly, I mean, maybe he is pointing, talking about social construction or reduction to relations. I don't know. We probably shouldn't speculate.
okay,
Um,
here we go. Something has happened to materialism. In many ways, it seems that we have come full circle from the early modern controversies over the various abilities of material entities. For a short while, materialism seemed to be a foolproof appeal to a type of agency and a set of entities and forces that allowed analysts to explain, dismiss, or see through other types of agencies. Okay, we're going to get an example here. Typically, for instance, it was possible to explain conceptual superstructures by means of material infrastructures. Thus, an appeal to a sound, table thumping materialism seemed an ideal way to shatter the pretensions of those who tried to hide their brutal interests behind notions like morality, culture, religion, politics, or art. Do you want to say anything so far?
um, Forces that allowed analysts to explain, dismiss. Okay, full proof of appeal to a type to a set of entities and forces that allowed us to dismiss other types of agencies. So that sounds like the mereology that Harman was talking about. You could reduce macroscopic objects to,
Mm-hmm.
atoms and things like that. Um, so if that's the case, we could kind of anticipate that he wants to say that the things that we're calling matter, like atoms and quarks, are more like abstract scientific models, and they don't have the right. They are we model them on macroscopic objects, which might be hard and um, right, but they don't actually share that. So, and then the possibility of explaining conceptual superstructures by means of material infrastructures. I don't know what that means.
I mean, that sounds like a conceptual superstructure just might mean the way that we cut up the world for everyday purposes. So the mid-sized objects, cups and squirrels and things. Well, let's just say we explain the differences between those insofar as there are authentic differences by means of their uh, matter and the structure of matter.
So gold is one thing, water is another.
Yep.
We have their we have their macro level properties that we interact with, and we can see the distinction, but we can explain it by appealing to H2O and what's the what's the symbol for gold? Is it AG or is it
AU.
silver? AU. All right.
I mean, ironically, a table thumping materialism, if we're right, the table doesn't, right? The table ends up getting reduced to its component molecules and things. So
Mm-hmm.
that's you're literally thumping something that is going to be reduced in your ontology, if
Something
that's
that's
what we're talking about.
mostly space. No matter.
But that little thing at the end, the reason I wanted to stop, those who want to hide their brutal interests behind notions like morality, culture, religion, politics, or art. So I'm not exactly sure. I mean, this sounds like the feminist critique of uh, using supposed scientific objectivity to mask your totalizing oppressive viewpoint. But I'm not really sure because that's not
And then,
using art, for instance.
well, in the case of Marx, he thought of himself as a materialist, right? He was shattering the pretensions of bourgeois ideology, representing its own interests as if they were, uh, you know, in the general interest or moral or something like that. When they really it was just their brutal interests. So yeah, that kind of materialism. I think Marxian materialism was supposed to shatter that in a sense, but
Sure.
we'd have to say specifically how. You could look at, you could maybe make an argument that Nietzsche's version of this there's a materialism to it, right? He wants to be deflationary about morality, but anyway, yeah, we should just
Yes,
read
that
it.
is much closer than my guess, which was sort of confusing who's being attacked with who's doing the attacking here. Um, let's just keep going. Yeah, go next sentence there.
But that's precisely the point. It was an ideal and not a material way of making a point. Materialism, in the short period in which it could be used as a discussion closing trope, implied that what now appears in retrospect as a rather idealist definition of matter and its various agencies. I'm not enough of a historian to put dates on this short period where the materialistic explanans had its greatest force, but it might not be totally off the mark to say that it persisted from the era of post-Marxism, Marx's own definition of material explanation being infinitely more subtle than what his successors made of it, all the way to the end of the century sociobiologists who tried without much success to insert their own simplistic mechanisms into the glorious lineage of Darwin. Yeah, so here it sounds like right, reduction of right. We might reduce all of human culture to, you know, a biological substrate, for instance, or be reductionist in the Freudian, what some people might think is the Freudian sense, where right all of culture is just sublimation of sexual instincts or something like that. Is that what he's pointing us to now? Shatter the pretensions of those who try to hide their.
I think it's probably something simpler than that. I think that because he says, "Oh, even Marx is not guilty of this," it's the idea of just the dumbest sort of the world is just particles in the void bumping against each other, causing things, and everything, all of science is supposed to be reducible to this. And so he's going to say that there's something wrong with this conception, that this is not either scientifically based or it's not properly materialist in some sense. We'll have to see.
All right, so you know we can say that about identity theory in philosophy of consciousness, right? Consciousness just must be reducible to the brain.
Yes,
And then
definitely.
anything else we could say about culture and morality and all the rest of it, we could be deflationary about it from a materialist point of view. This is kind of what Dostoevsky represents really well in his novels and associates with nihilism. Whose turn is it to read here?
I think it's me. Why does this materialism appear to us in retrospect as much too idealist? The reason has been worked out only recently in various commentaries on Alfred North Whitehead's philosophy. Under the rubric of matter, two totally different types of movement had been conflated. First, the way we move knowledge forward in order to access things that are far away or otherwise inaccessible. And second, the way things move to keep themselves in existence. We can identify matter with one or the other, but not with the two together without absurdity. Of course, we might marvel at the miracle of a correspondence between the geometrization of the ways we know and the geometrization of the things that are known, but this is because we commit, wittingly or unwittingly, a little sleight of hand and explain this spurious correspondence by the fact that the, quote, primary qualities of the objects known are themselves geometrical. That is easy to do when all the other qualities, those that will become the secondary qualities, have been carefully eliminated one after the other.
All right. So, so there's an objection here to. Well, maybe let's go back up to the top. The second part was pretty.
I do not get these things because I would not have thought matter refers to movements at all. If anything, it would refer to objects in the void, you know, causality generally. But those are not the types of movement what he's talking about, right? The way things move to keep themselves in existence. That sounds Aristotelian.
Yeah, unless we're thinking, unless we get fancy about it and think, well, an atom, right? It must have moving components in order to exist. It's, the most fundamental level, matter must be movement. And if he's referencing Whitehead, maybe this is exactly what he means, right? So you need circular movement. The form persists, but the form persists by this kind of repetitive movement. And I've made the association between that and Aristotle before, so I think it does look very Aristotelian, and maybe that's what Whitehead is doing in part. I'm not sure, but
What's this other type of movement? The way we move knowledge forward in order to access things that are far away or otherwise inaccessible. Why is that? Why would anyone think that that is a definition of materialism as opposed to materialism being a metaphysical position, and this is clearly an epistemic technique?
yeah, I mean, I don't know. It just unless he wants to say that the movement of knowledge forward and involves reducing everything to spatiotemporal movement, right? Um, and then so maybe he's saying it, but he's conceding broadly that there must be a being at work, being itself, but then wants to say we shouldn't reduce that to spatiotemporal. Um, right. What moves knowledge forward is this capacity of science to, reduce everything to equations and what Harman is going to associate with the continuum. I mean, later on we get the objection to primary qualities, which is really just a recapitulation of Kant, right? We can do with the primary qualities what we did with the secondary qualities, which is just to say they're in the head and not
Yep.
out there. But for the science, it's very important and this I agree with, to a scientific theory of matter. Well, it at least starts out being important, as it was for Galileo and Locke, that one can say, well, yeah, the geometrical properties of things are the things in themselves, and they are the things to which we have direct access. So that, yeah, when we experience the red rose, red is just in our head, and it's a product of the relationship between our faculties, the way our body and mind happen to be structured, and this thing out there, and that produces the red. But the redness is to be explained in terms of primary qualities and light bouncing off something and the rose and then coming into our eye and thus producing the red. You need if you're going to have secondary qualities, you need to be able to appeal to things in themselves which cause them. So anyway, so he's
Does
making a very, very standard objection to that.
does the idea of geometrical here literally mean geometrical, or is it just a shorthand for saying law-like, accessible by science? So we reduce all the messiness, right? So it's an attack on scientism. We reduce all the messiness to just what is tangible, what is. I mean, it's interesting that does. Would we say then democracy is something far away or otherwise inaccessible, and we reduce it to shapes? We reduce it to things that can be measured, amounts of various. So I'm not sure what the things far away that he was referring to in the earlier part. Um, but if we say
Um,
that geometrical here just means law-like, then the issue is, oh, look, our science, our equations that we come up to explain things. Look how simple and streamlined and elegant they are. Isn't it amazing that we're able to do that because the logos is also in things themselves? Well, it's only in things themselves because you've in advance stripped away anything that is not quantifiable from reality and said, oh, that's merely a secondary quality. Although what's left, the primary qualities, those are so geometrical and law-like.
yeah, I think generalizing it to logos probably makes sense. I think when he says we move knowledge forward in order to access things that are far away and otherwise inaccessible, I think the otherwise inaccessible is, of course, something like an atom,
Hmm.
um, which we can't see exactly, but we have to theorize and posit as a model and in order to explain phenomena that we are more directly acquainted with. So, um,
Well, why would that be? Why would that conflict with the way things move to keep themselves in existence as something on the atomic level? So yeah, I'm as a scientist who I'm theorizing about these little tiny bits, and when I theorizing that about them, I say this is the way that
yeah.
a gold atom continues to be itself by having this internal motion. I don't
Well, I
see any
was,
sleight of
yeah.
hand, or this seems very compatible.
Well, yeah, but I think what he's saying, I mean, I was speculating that what he's saying is the way things move to keep themselves in existence might be more Aristotelian. It might be something else, and we shouldn't equate it with, you know, mathematical equations about spatiotemporal entities. Um, that's the thing that can move knowledge forward. That's the thing that gives us technology. That's the low hanging fruit in a sense. But we ought not to conflate the reality and whatever fundamental dynamism is at the bottom of reality with the dynamism that science gives us. Now that's purely me speculating because I do find it surprising that he's embracing what seems like a more Aristotelian and again maybe it's Whitehead as well view about the fundamental dynamism of things. It's that which is a view that I'm very fond of. But yeah,
Does Aristotle say that the things themselves, the object of the study, has a logos, and that is why it can be grasped? I mean, this seems very compatible with what I know about Aristotle, but I just didn't recall him making that. I mean, that's I'm putting it in by saying it's logos. It's the Heraclitean formulation that fundamentally things are measurable ratios. That's why science the world is explorable by science. Do you see that as
yeah.
anti-Aristotelian or very Aristotelian?
Well, I'm not sure. Like during our metaphysics, Aristotle metaphysics episodes, I tried to kind of draw a connection between the concept of an atom and that kind of dynamism of being at the bottom of things, and then Aristotle's idea of being at work, being itself, that sort of dynamism, and that's a bit strained, obviously, or maybe very strained, because for Aristotle, the dynamism seems to come from the well, it comes in a sense from the form as a final end, but it also keeps the form going. But let's not get into the details about all the causal stuff. But how does that work with Aristotle? It's a bit more mysterious. How it works with science is much more straightforward and involves spatial matter in space and
Well,
matter moving in space. So does for Aristotle, does it involve like micro level entities moving around? I don't. Not on the face of it. I don't know them. I don't know how compatible. Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, you're bringing my mind to his objections to pure materialism, that you can't just have a Lucretius, a Democritus type just stuff, that you have to have the form, you have to have them merged in this way, that the fundamental unit is the formed matter, not just matter in which form would. So maybe this is the contrast that he's pointing out, is that the idea of something moving to keep itself in existence is the Aristotelian one. And uh, the other one, I still wouldn't put it in the way that Latour does here, the way we move knowledge forward in order to access things that are far away or otherwise inaccessible. But what fundamentally makes that the case is that there is observable dead matter, right? If you say that there's something fundamental about forces that are not directly observable, then you don't. I'm just thinking of the telescope or something. Like, we don't observe the gravity; you just observe the positions of the planets, and you come up with your equations based on that. So that seems compatible with just atoms in the void. So it's atoms in the void versus being at work being itself seems to be the
Hmm.
thing that he thinks that materialists are committing themselves to both, which I don't know that I agree with that, because I feel like the being at work being itself is only for Aristotle scholars. I don't know that I understand the comparison to our model of the atom, but I guess I've never really heard a physicist or chemist say, and that's what makes the atom what it is because it has this motion, like that, characterize it as fundamentally motion. But perhaps you read more than I have in this area.
Um, yeah, I mean it's right. It has to be. It has to be. You don't think it's fundamentally motion? I mean, it's motion of electrons or an electron shell, right? It gets complicated, but um, it's so. I think what's the important thing is that what we experience as something relatively static and persistent at a macro level is produced by change. And I think Aristotle was very interested in this idea that becoming somehow underwrites being. Change underwrites staying the same. And yeah, at that level, it's all buzzing, confusion, and movement. And then we get what look like relatively, comparatively, right? The atom is a very, it can be a very stable entity, but but it is because the movement is all circular in a sense. The electrons don't just fly off into the void. The thing doesn't just dissipate and collapse because of the movement. The movement has to be repetitive and ordered. So yeah, I mean that's my association, but I think it is. I
Well,
think
and
it's
that's probably
important. I
different
think
than
it's important even in
Democritus,
physics. Yeah.
right? That's not Democritus. It's not when you say atoms in the void or something. It seems like it's something more static. Let's just get into the paragraph out.
Well,
See,
for Democritus, this is one more. For Democritus, right? Or for Epicurus,
it was
Lucretius building
Lucretius
off.
that had the swerve, right? So
Yes,
so things are
but
moving, but
also the theory, from Epicurus, and I don't know how it relates to Democritus, but is that you just have all these atoms flying around and they accidentally concatenate
yeah,
into ordered the kinds of things that we see, but then there's some principle of why they would persist that way and not fall apart again. But so it's almost like natural selection. And swerve is very important because it is sort of like the mutation part of natural selection. You need to try all the different possibilities before something gets selected. But anyway, all right, yeah, let's just continue to read. Is it my turn? The application of this point to technical entities is rather straightforward, but it is well worth insisting on, since the history of technology has for so long been a bastion of the idealist materialism I've just mentioned. I wish he'd say
he
more about
he
how it's idealist
yeah, he sure
materialism.
hasn't.
Because it's an interesting idea and we ought to be told what it is. I mean, he's alluded to it, but all right. We can still understand James Watts's beautifully drawn designs of a steam engine without any difficulty, even though steam engines themselves have all but vanished. For any piece of machinery to be drawn to specs by an engineer on one hand, should be on the one hand, or to remain functional without rusting and rotting away on the other, requires us to accept two very different types of existence. All right, let's pause here for a second. Because we're back to this whole knowledge versus thing. Um,
I guess I hadn't really thought about that. That
Technology. Yeah.
supposedly uh, a machine to continue to exist needs to uh, be dynamic as opposed to just drawing it to specs. Uh, Sounds like it's not even out of the box yet. I mean, is that really all that's we're talking about? You can't have your machine and leave it in the box mint unsealed too. Something.
To have, okay, two very different types of existence. Um, it's weird to call the specs a type of existence, right? It's a representation or a plan. But he wants to insist on the existence part of that representation. So yeah, to represent something or to come up with a diagram or a plan for making it is of course a very different thing than the actual thing. Um, and this has somehow got to be related to the idealist materialism that technology is the bastion of. I don't know. I guess we'll have to read on here.
To
To exist
exist.
as a, yeah, I got it. To exist as a part inter partes. Sorry, part inter partes. To exist as a part inter partes inside the isotopic space invented by the long history of geometry, still life painting, and technical drawing. Wow, it's somehow still life painting. Made that we got geometry and technical, and it just insert still life paintings. And technical drawing is not at all the same as existing as an entity that has to resist decay and corruption. No shit. Obvious? Okay. Okay, he's anticipating that. Yes, of course. But then why do we so often act as if matter itself were made of parts that behave just like those technical drawings? All right, here's the rub. Which live on indefinitely in a timeless, unchanging realm of geometry. Why is the name of mechanical philosophy, itself an exceedingly complex affair, as historians of science have shown, why in the name of mechanical philosophy, do we still take this view of technical artifacts seriously, as if the ontological qualities of matter itself were the same as the ontological qualities of drawing and moving parts around in a geometrical space? This sounds like just a way of saying what I've already said, which is that the models, we shouldn't take our models, scientific models, literally. The atom doesn't just, you know, look exactly like that. It's more, the models are more like a metaphor for predicting the phenomena. Right?
Yeah. What? Who is he attacking?
Yeah, exactly. We act as if the matter itself were made of parts that behave just like those of technical drawings. Well, they might behave, they might be isomorphic, right? Um, even if it's all code, right? Even if it's thing in itself stuff that we will never directly know, that doesn't mean it can't be like the technical drawings. You
I
know,
mean, it
if you
sounds like once you actually make the machine, then it has to operate in a world of forces that run it toward decay. And to keep it working, I mean, a biological entity has mechanisms that it can keep itself working and fight against, at least to some extent, and fight against decay. So it seems like something about life and adaptation versus a mechanical philosophy. So this, if we're gonna again relate this to Whitehead and in general what was going on at his time, this vitalism that we want to say that fundamentally matter should be should be or is seen by his opponents. This is what I'm not completely sure about. Maybe he's just saying that we try to be mechanists and vitalists, and that there's something inconsistent about that. But again, I don't see why any of that would make you an idealist.
yeah. I mean, we should keep in mind that atoms have to resist decay too, right? They have a strong nuclear force, and they can decay. They can become radioactive um, under certain circumstances or for certain elements. Uh, but
But your bicycle does not, right? Because he's talking about or your steam engine does not self heal, right? It has as part of the design are things to just immediately not make the its wheels fly off, right? It has
Yeah, I mean the drawing is static and it's geometrical and seems timeless. And so he's saying we want to project that onto reality when reality is not really that way. But
So this is all going to be
which I
process
don't think
philosophy.
anyone
Is
is
that
saying reality is that
yeah?
way. We know that the underlying reality is dynamic, unlike the drawing. We know the entity has to resist decay and corruption. I don't think anyone would deny that, and that atoms have ways of doing that. So yeah, this is just going back to your question of who is this attacking. I mean, we could take the general point that maybe right that the way that our the primary qualities that we represent as being the things in themselves are not the things in themselves. Okay, yeah, this is Kant already did this. This is an old idea being expressed in a new way. But
This is why the materialism of the recent past now looks so idealistic. It takes the idea of what things in themselves should be, that is, primary qualities, and then never stops gawking at the miracle that makes them resemble their geometrical reproduction in drawings. And this miracle is idealist a second time because it ignores entirely the difficulty of producing drawings and the whole network of engineering practices necessary to identify the features, follow the lines, and assemble the whole institution necessary for any mechanisms to function. Technical drawing is an extremely difficult activity to sustain and calibrate. The whole notion of mechanism is a twice idealized definition of the way we know and the behavior of what we know. No wonder, then, that when it is transported to the fields of economics or genetics or used to supply biological or social quote unquote explanations, it creates so much trouble.
all right, so we get okay. Yep, things in themselves aren't really primary qualities. Or primary qualities aren't things in themselves. Idealist the second time. Now it sounds like he wants to say, right, do the thing that Latour is famous for, and
Yeah.
this is almost like something like social construction, where it's the practice, right? It's the something is created by the engineering practice, which includes drawing. Um,
And isn't
Mechanism is
isn't his
instant.
solutions
Yeah.
supposed to be anti-idealist? Like, I mean, that's he's arguing explicitly against idealism here, um, because it creates objects out of hybrids. That instead of just saying, "Look, there's all just the stuff that humans do in their heads," and then there's these physical these models that we create, these physical objects that we create. No, because a social practice uh, involves physical things. I'm just trying to remember sort of more things from what we have been modern. We've never been modern, and that Harman is bringing up. That you end up. Well, let's at least Harman's point of view is that we should have more objects, and so we can define. Don't just define this clock that's been constructed. Define it in terms of the whole industrial process and knowledge process that brought us this clock. And so it's almost like clockhood is an event, right? The clock coming, but we can pick that whole thing out as an object. Um, Now, is he saying that this is to be consistent? This is what materialists have to do, and so because they're doing that, therefore they're surreptitiously being idealist and they don't know it. I'm just having trouble putting the pieces together here.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I don't know. But we shall find out.
Okay, go ahead with the next one then.
The problems with this idealized materialism can clearly be seen in Demian, how do you pronounce that? Ortega's fascinating installation, Cosmic Thing, which John Tresh discusses in his essay. This piece, which represents, sorry, in his essay, I missed that period. This piece, which presents what is in effect the exploded view, in French, a crochet, of a VW beetle, offers a deceptive transparency that the following essays refuse to accept. Of course, the great irony of the installation is that if the exploded view, rendered familiar to us by the invention of technical drawing, projective geometry, and the innovations all the way to computer aided design, is a great way to draw parts, order their fabrication, stabilize specifications, verify standards, maintain inventories, and render all these operations traceable and accountable. How's that for a clause? It is nevertheless decidedly not what defines the thingness or the cosmicity of techniques. Oh my God. The visual imaginary space in which an exploded view is made possible is infinitely distant from the way any VW beetle inhabits the world, or rather, the cosmos. It
I
sounds
mean, this sounds like
a
yeah,
Harmonian inaccessible object, but yeah, go ahead.
yeah. I was thinking like Bergson, Heidegger, Whitehead. The once we analyze something, we're not actually observing it in its being in the world. We've ripped it apart. We've created a different object.
Yeah. I don't know. That defines right. The exploded beetle, right, which I imagine has all the, you can see inside and all the engine and all the parts, but which some technical drawings kind of do. Right, that has practical advantages that help you build a beetle, but it doesn't define the thingness or the cosmicity of technique. You know, you would expect them to say of the thingness of the beetle, the VW beetle, but the thingness, maybe of the beetle is implied there, and then there's the cosmicity of techniques, which I'm not quite
Well,
sure
this is what I was
is,
saying, that I don't know that he can say that the beetle is an object by itself, or that the correct way to do ontology is to break things into. Right. So he's not a materialist, as I understand him, right? That he creates things, he creates objects that are hybrids, and in fact, maybe everything is in fact a hybrid. So you can't consider it's a very different. If the forces of nature were to have constructed a VW Beetle entirely by chance, even if it was point to point identical with the one built in the factory, it would still be a completely different thing because its history is baked into how we characterize it as a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Which obviously that's a very complex example. You could use a chair or something like I made this sitting rock in my factory and I analyzed how people sit on rocks, and then clearly there could be a natural rock that would match that, but they're still different things.
Yeah.
Although how did I make the sitting rock? I probably just got a natural rock and just carved some pieces off it. So maybe this is not, I can't come up with a good example.
All right.
In other words, where res extensa is a way to draw technical parts side by side, those parts themselves do not assemble or gather or survive as if they were in res extensa or made of matter. Or rather, we are now faced with two different definitions of matter. One, the idealist one, in which the reproduction of the parts through geometry is confused with the reproduction of the parts themselves, and another in which those two pathways are clearly distinct. The first gives way to objects, the description of which is always thin. The second gives way to things, which are the topics, as Ken Adler says in his introduction, of thick description. Thin objects, on the other hand, with an ideal definition of matter, thick things, on the other, with a material definition of matter. This seems to me to be the choice offered to the reader of the pieces in this focus section.
All right. So spatiotemporality is just which he's calling geometry, is kind of idealism. It's, as Kant would say. Um, and so we need things that are we to really get at the material things in their thick sense. We need to go beyond treating them as res extensa, go beyond treating them as just geometry. And you can see that. I mean, for Descartes, it did look very much like a kind of idealism, right? Because for res extensa didn't even include things we normally associate with matter, like solidity, right? It was just like shapes that resist interpenetration by each other. It was like pure geometry. Of course, it's a bit of a stretch to accuse modern science of the same thing, but if he's right, it's similar enough.
Right. Is it just, again, insofar as we think that material gives way to science because it follows the logos, because it is law-like, and that just saying that right there is idealist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, anything formal, right? Platonic idealism is, well, things are structural, things are formal, and form is idea. Yeah.
As opposed to a material definition of matter, things. So we don't know what thick things are. Again, this is a postscript to, I guess, where thick things would have been explained, but based on the contrast to this scientifically, socially constructed view of the world as geometrical patterns, basically. What would the opposite of the opposite of that be? What Harman talks about as a, a a real thing, in other words, something that has innumerable properties that we're never going to be able to know, just an irreducible inwardness. Whereas science tries to just reduce all these concrete things to mere models, mere abstract shapes, shadows of themselves.
It's a different form of impenetrability, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not the impenetrability of the table we bang our fist against, but the impenetrability, right? So of ordinary matter, but the impenetrability of just not being accessible, just not being, it's just being withdrawn. That's the kind of hard and fast. The other side of cognition is, it could be just withdrawal. That's the thing against which the mind butts up against. Let's put it that way. That's the. So I don't know. Yeah, this is very vague. Who knows what it is? Thick, thin sounds like Sandel. We know what thick selves are in Sandel as opposed to Kantian selves. Thick selves have identities. Are new material things going to have identities of some thick sort? They'll be more than geometry. They will be what? Fire, earth, air, water.
Let's try it.
Let's go back to the elements. All right. Is it my turn?
Yep.
This does not mean that reproduction through geometry is abstract, cold, and dead, while reproduction through steel, brass, or wood is concrete, warm, and alive. But simply that geometry is what allows engineers to draw and know the parts, while the parts themselves go their own ways and follow, so to speak, their own directions. If Ortega had really wanted to provide a view of the VW Beetle that would do justice to his title, Cosmic Thing, he would have to redo his installation entirely and do for the Beetle what Gabriel Hecht and Viba Bijker and Ken Adler have done for their uranium rocks, dams, and lie detectors. That is, first prodigiously extend the number of parts necessary for the gathering of the Beetle, and then multiply the number of assembling principles that gather them together in a functioning whole. The suspension of the parts side by side with nylon thread is a nice way of reminding us of the gathering aspect of every technical whole. It's really not, it's not interesting at all, in fact, as far as I'm concerned, but let's go. But it is much too restricted a census of which parts are necessary and of the process through which they might coalesce together. To the assemblage of parts, Ortega should have added an assembly of entities that would have made his installation really worthy of the name cosmic thing. All right.
All right. Conceptually second guessing someone else's artwork. I
Yeah.
can't say that I understand what he's actually suggesting, but I feel contempt for the whole enterprise, and I feel like we should move on.
Assemblage versus assembly. Sorry. Let me just see. Multiply the number of assembling. Yeah, let's just leave it aside.
I mean, assembly of entities, the latter, as opposed to the assemblage of parts, is adding a process. So this is process ontology versus object ontology. That science sees everything as just a static, beautifully arranged things, and whereas reality is a messy process with too many variables to keep track of. This is why I always find it baffling that people would take Heidegger's philosophy of technology seriously. Not only would Heidegger see no difference whatsoever between an atomic bomb, a dam, a lie detector, and a staple, all being merely examples of the same enframing, but when he finally gives some respect to a shoe or a hammer, it is only to see it as the assembly of four elements, his fourfold.
Hey, I was right. Air, earth, fire, water. Sorry, go ahead.
To be sure, such tools may be beautifully made, and it is much better to call on the gods and the mortals, heaven and earth, to account for their emergence than to dismiss them as the thinnest of mere objects. But look again at the VW Beetle. Just four elements, really? That's a very small list, indeed. According to Hecht, there are many more than four existing deities, or dimensions, or factors brought simultaneously into play in order to define what it is for uranium to be nuclear. Any technical imbroglio forces us to count way beyond four. But it is true, and here Heidegger sends the inquiry in the right direction, that any artifact is a form of assembling or gathering of thinging entities together. And it is absurd to forget the mortals and the gods when describing a piece of hardware, or even the most hypermodern ones. But I'm sure that Heidegger would refuse to comment on Ortega's exploded view. And Ortega himself, by offering, as I have just said, such a limited number of parts and types of assembling, betrays the title he gave to his piece, or else he's enjoying himself with a very modernist irony that follows the same patterns as Heidegger's spite for modernity.
Can't believe I'm going to defend Heidegger here. I don't think the four elements are supposed to be taken literally in Heidegger. Although the fourfold is baffling, right? But
I don't remember this in his technology essay that we did on this show. I don't remember this fourfold.
There's an essay he did. I want to say it's called The Thing, but that can't be right. That was a movie. What is it called? Because I have read it and kind of analyzed it. Yeah, it's called The Thing. It is called The Thing. Yeah, he brings up the four. It gets rather. This is the version of Heidegger that's gets rather mysterious with this fourfold.
And is it air, earth, fire, water, or
it's
were
a
you
version
joking?
of
It's
that,
mortals,
like,
heaven, and earth.
Yeah, well, it
gods and mortals.
corresponds to air, earth, fire, water, right? But you
Okay.
translate that into the heavens, but now I don't know what it does for Heidegger specifically, and then I don't know why he wants more elements and what that would mean. You need more than four existing deities. This sounds like arguing about the number of angels that fit on the head of a pin. How many deities do we want for uranium to be nuclear? I mean, I suppose this is just his way of saying that Heidegger can't do justice to the complexities of modern science with this type of mythology, but no philosophical mythology can. Latour is not gonna offer us something that is equivalent just to doing science. Yeah, that's not what philosophy is going to do. So I don't understand the objection.
Well, Heidegger does not do justice to technology because he's not interested in technology. He's interested in technology as a singular oppressive force that is separating us from the real and that kind of stuff, and that we need to get in touch with the life world and let beings be and not try to just instrumentalize everything and treat everything as an object, a presence to hand. Uh, yeah. So, but I'm not, and so it seems like Latour is more of an actual fan of technology, that we're creating real things. We're not just creating a veneer through which we can keep from authentically experiencing life. We are gods. We are creating, even a machine is in a certain sense a living thing. Although he said earlier, look, I'm not talking about the difference between just dead matter and life. It's not that kind of thing. It's just by even a machine being in the world is messy and is irreducible in a certain way. I know we're kind of getting toward the end, but we do have
Yeah, let's just
basically
finish
one
it.
page, so let's just
Yeah.
crank through. All right.
All right. What is so promising about extricating materialism from its idealist counterpart? Okay. We still want to know what materialism is. We know the idealist counterpart, which involves math, unfortunately, of which the concept of enframing is a typical example. Okay, so enframing is part of the idealist.
It's part of the extrication.
Okay.
We want to extract materialism and just get rid of the idealism. So actually letting the beings be,
Okay.
letting the beings be transcendent. Yeah, that makes it a thick thing.
Sounds good
And
to
so
me.
in framing,
leave beings alone.
yeah.
I like it. All right. So what's so promising about it is that it accounts for the surprise and opacity that are so typical of techniques as things, and that techniques as objects drawn in the res extensa mode completely hide. The exploded view principle of description makes it possible to overcome one of the main aspects of bringing an artifact into existence: opacity. In other words, it draws the object as if it were open to inspection and mastery, while it hides the elementary mode of existence of technical artifacts. To take up Gilbert Simondon's title, parts hide one another, and when the artifact is completed the activity that fit them together disappears entirely. Mastery, prediction, clarity, and functionality are very local and tentative achievements that are not themselves obtained through inside the idealized digital or paper world of res extensa, even though it would be impossible to carry them forward without working upon and with technical drawings and models. But again, it is not the same thing to do work upon a model, mathematical, analogical, digital, as it is for a technical assemblage to be the model. As every engineer knows, scaling up or scaling down in the case of miniaturization and industrialization is a tough, surprising adventure filled with twists and detours. I want to say to him, congratulations, you've been to a factory and you've been to an art museum, an art exhibition. It's
But
not making
I like
philosophy
this.
sexier in the way that you think it is. But
I like this point that, you would think that if just the diagram of here's how a steam engine is supposed to work, then you should be able to make it any size. But the diagram only works based on, it's not, a God invented, it's based on past designs, right? I'm proposing this design because I approximately know how trains were designed in the past. And so I'm making one with some, tweaks and optimizations and things. But if you try to, make the same thing 1,000th of the size, well, then the chemical processes by which the coal lets off energy no longer work in that size. You can't fit enough coal in there, or if there's not enough room for the relevant explosions. I don't know how steam engines work, but I imagine that you have to have enough surface area for it to work.
Yeah. What's funny about this is that the technical drawing that got the Beatles started was a doodle on a napkin by a man named Adolf Hitler. I don't know if you knew that, but it's true.
No, I didn't know
You
this
know
at
he
all.
designed the VW Beetle? He designed it in the sense he wrote he drew it, and it's online. You can look at the picture that he drew that German engineers then went and turned into the Beetle. It looks, very much like the Beetle. But so why that example with her? But anyway, all right. Tough, surprising adventure filled with twists and detours. As soon as one assimilates mechanisms to the res extensa mode, one is no longer prepared to encounter any of the tricky, clever innovations that go with every technical gathering. Nor is there any room left for the Daedalus or a Victor Frankenstein, though aspects of these mythological figures abound in the tale recounted in these essays. Right? There's no room left for them because they didn't exist and they weren't scientists. They were a mythological variation on a scientist, but they didn't exist and they'll never exist. Sorry.
I think you
As
can skip the rest of the sentence because it's just referring to things that are in this collection of books that we're not reading here.
Okay.
Finally, what one is no longer prepared to encounter either are the various meddlers known in an earlier period of our disciplines as the social context that surrounded artifacts that were otherwise essentially imperturbable. After having remained for so long, rather politely at a safe distance around the techniques, now meddlers of all sorts, not only engineers, of course, but also members of the public, those who suffer various unwanted consequences of technology, militants, dreamers, activists, lawyers, are part and parcel of the gathering of techniques. Each of the essays in this focus section shows this major shift in our understanding of technological things. It was also strikingly revealed in 2003 when, after the explosion of the shuttle Columbia, hundreds of hitherto unknown actors had to be drawn into the discussion. A legal dispute, a thing in the etymological sense. Suddenly, everyone discovered that the shuttle was actually encased in an organization, NASA, and that many parts of Columbia could not be seen in an Ortega-style exploded view of the shuttle. So yes, this is the normal Latour thing that we have to draw processes, we have to draw techniques, we have to draw organizations, social entities into our understanding what a thing is. And maybe this is actually what makes it a thick thing, that a
Yep.
thin thing, yes. So it's not actually going to be the thing in itself, the thing that Harman wants, the inaccessible inner qualities of the thing, which science can describe, right? Or if you're saying like the quark is the basic thing, like, well, what is the transcendence that the quark no, it is defined as like the simplest possible thing. Oh, but no, if we're gonna do the thing that Harman accuses Latour of doing it as, the thickness is its relationships to everything else.
Mm-hmm.
And yet those parts were indeed elements of the process of assembly necessary for the final assemblage of parts to function safely. But no more than the stakeholders in so many of the projects reviewed by Bijker did they have any way to be literally drawn together within the conventions of technical representation now entrenched into CAD digital files, right? Computer-aided drafting. Read
All right.
last paragraph.
Perhaps this is where we meet the limit of the thick description of things. We know how to provide a thin description of an entity's idealized material aspects, as these essays show. We are finally starting to learn how to give a post hoc narrative thick description of what should have been visible in the gathering that brings a thing together. Similarly, after the shuttle's explosion, a tough inquiry was pursued, and yet we still don't know how to assemble in a single visually coherent space all the entities necessary for a thing to become an object, Ortega's installation notwithstanding. When we have learned how to do that, we might finally get our materialism back and our cosmic things to boot. That's when the plot will really thicken. Yeah, so it sounds like materialism is just social constructionism.
Well, yeah, so it's Marxist materialism that Marx was had it right, that to say what a thing is to talk about the material conditions that brought it about, which is not just the matter involved. It is ironically, given the name, given the double name here of materialism, is that it's going to involve a lot of history. It's going to involve a lot of power relations. Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. All right.
Okay,
Let's
now we'll
call it.
know when we refer to that little tiny thing in Harman. I'll have to look up again. Where was this actually referenced? And is this something we've already talked about, or something that we're going to talk about with him on our next recording? Anyway, people can look forward to that, and maybe we'll take another stab at something. One of the other things I had suggested that maybe we can do next time or never. I don't know. It was just Harmon going on and on about how he loves Latour. So like, is that, do we actually see them as so in conflict that that would be enlightening, or do we see them as so similar that, okay, this is not going to add anything to understanding here of Harmon? All right.
All
Well,
right.
we hope you give us a nice rating and review. Close Reads Philosophy
Follow us.
.com is how to find the various things. And support us, patreon.com/Close Reads Philosophy, and you'll find our entire catalog there, including a lot more video than you will have found on YouTube or wherever. Bye.
Thank you.